I stood in the hallway holding the gift I'd wrapped with quiet care. My knees ached more than usual that day, but I still wore the blouse I'd ironed twice just in case the collar turned in. The dining room was lit warm, golden. Plates clinked. Laughter came easy from the other side. And when I finally stepped in, no one looked up. There were 11 seats. 11, I counted them twice. And not a single one for me. Someone said I should grab a plate from the kitchen. That there wasn't. Space now, but I could still eat in the den where the kids were watching television. I remember blinking once. Once, twice, the wrapping paper in my hands was soft from my grip, damp now for my palms. My daughter didn't even meet my eyes. She just kept passing the potatoes. I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story travels. I used to tell myself it would get better, that she was tired, that motherhood was a lot. I had said those same things to myself once, hadn't I? Back when she was colicky and my husband worked double shifts and my arms stayed sore from rocking her until dawn. I never once asked my own mother to take over. She had a coldness about her that I swore I wouldn't pass down. I thought I'd broken the chain. I truly did. My daughter was soft once, soft like a cotton blanket left out in spring sun. She used to press her ear to my chest to hear my heartbeat when she couldn't sleep. Her little fingers would reach out, clutching my sleeve when I tried to move away too soon. I packed her lunches with little folded napkins that said, "You're going to do great today." I stitched Halloween costumes. I sewed the hem of her wedding dress with thread from my own mother's sewing box. I used to think she'd remember all that. But memory is selective. And love, I've learned, can be transactional when you're no longer needed. The signs were there long before the missing chair. Birthday cards that arrived late, unsigned by her, just scribbled by the children. Family photos that somehow cropped me out. Holidays where I was asked to maybe rest this year while her in-laws got the guest room and wine poured into their glasses. Once I brought her roses for her promotion and she smiled like I'd handed her a parking ticket. The isolation was not loud. It was not cruel. It was logistical, convenient, a series of not yets and maybes and forgot to call yous. I stopped. Being invited to parent-teacher nights. When I asked about the youngest's asthma, she said I was imagining it, that he'd outgrown it years ago. I remembered holding him upright through his first wheeze. I remembered the hospital curtain, the beeping, the soft foam dinosaur I brought to distract him. Apparently, I remembered too much. Even my phone calls started going to voicemail. She'd text later, always later, that they'd been in. A thing. So many things. One evening, I dropped by with a bag of groceries. My hands were full, and I used my elbow to press the bell. I heard her voice behind the door, whispering something. I stepped back, not wanting to startle her. She didn't open it. I stood there 5 minutes later. She said they hadn't heard the bell, but I'd heard her whisper clear as day. She's probably here to borrow something again. That one took the air from me. Not because it was true, it wasn't, but because it was how she saw me. It's an old burden with open hands. The final piece came folded in half in a manila envelope. I found it in the mailbox one rainy morning, tucked between a store circular and a gas bill. It was addressed to me, but inside was a bank notice, a change of trustee, her name where mine once was, my own handwriting on the original file, back when I trusted her to safeguard the house. I remember sitting with her at the bank. She held my hand while I signed. She must have kept the papers. Waited for when she thought I wouldn't notice. But I noticed I didn't cry. I didn't even call her. I made a cup of tea. Sat by the window. It's the one that looked out at the little bird bath I'd placed years ago, where the robins still came in spring. I thought about everything I'd given, the title deed I'd transferred, the small inheritance from her father I'd never touched, the emergency account I'd built up over years of going without, new coats, and something in me shifted. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to stop being the fool in my own story. I took my quiet anger to a lawyer. A patient man in a gray sweater who didn't interrupt when I told him the whole thing from the beginning. He asked if I had records. I said yes. Every check, every agreement, every receipt, down to the last envelope. Then I spoke to the bank, then to a friend from the neighborhood association who knew a good housing advisor. The wheels began to turn, slowly but steadily, when the final day came. I did not slam a door. I did not raise my voice. I sat across from them, my daughter, her husband, their real estate broker, who didn't know what hit him, and I placed the corrected paperwork on the table. I had reinstated my ownership, revoked her permissions, and initiated proceedings to reclaim the property she had tried to quietly leverage. Her husband asked what I meant. I told him calmly that the house was never hers to sell and that they'd have 60 days to relocate. She looked at me like she didn't know who I was. That made two of us. I bought a small cottage upstate. Not fancy, but it has a garden and a screened porch and a swing. I installed myself with aching arms and a stubborn rope. Not there is a chair for me at the dinner table, always, even if I'm eating alone. There's a kettle that whistles now, and a neighbor who brings tomatoes in a basket. She weaves herself, and peace, real peace, not the kind you get from being tolerated. It's the kind that settles behind your ribs when you know you've stood up, even if your knees still hurt on rainy mornings. The thing about memory is, it doesn't always follow the rules. It doesn't care for chronology. It comes in temperature and scent. I can close my eyes and still feel the heat of her forehead against my collarbone the night she first had a fever. She was 3. The doctor said to keep her cool, sponge her down, call if it got worse. I stayed up the whole night with a bowl of water and a flannel. She was so small, sweating through her little green pajamas, breathing fast. I watched her chest rise and fall like it was the only thing that mattered in the world. And maybe back then it was. I remember the first time she said mama, not in the babble way, but as if she knew I would come. I had been in the laundry room, halfway through folding the towels, when I heard her. That single word wrapped in a whimper. When I got to her, she was standing in her crib, fingers curled around the wooden bars, looking straight at the door like she'd been expecting me. That was the first moment I knew what devotion felt like, the kind that seeps into your bones. Her father passed when she was 7. A traffic light that didn't turn red in time. A Tuesday afternoon with clear skies. Do you remember those details, even if they don't matter to anyone else? The silence in the hospital waiting room. The way her little hand reached for mine as the nurse spoke. How she asked if Daddy was still coming to the dance recital. I didn't know how to explain that absence to her. So I just held her and whispered, again and again, that I was here. And I always was. I showed up to every parent-teacher meeting, sewed every button, paid for her braces out of my grocery budget. There was a year when I didn't buy a single new piece of clothing for myself, just so she could go on the school trip to Washington, D.C. She came back with a little magnet shaped like the Capitol and said she forgot to bring me something. I stuck it on the fridge anyway. Still there, behind the picture of her high school graduation. She wore blue, and the cap sat crooked on her curls. She didn't let me fix it, said it made her look more natural. She used to fall asleep on the sofa with her head in my lap. We'd watch old movies together, black and white ones, with velvet voices and fogged-up train stations. She always wanted me to explain the endings, even when she was too old to ask, especially then. I gave her everything I had. I don't mean that like a martyr. I mean it like a mother. When she wanted piano lessons, I found a retired teacher down the block who gave her half-price sessions. When she turned 16 and said everyone else had a phone, I spent 4 months doing overnight inventory shifts at the pharmacy just to buy her one. She dropped it 2 weeks later and cracked the screen. I didn't say a word, just paid to fix it and told her to be careful. She promised she would. She didn't mean it cruelly. It's just like any teenager, wrapped in the noise of the moment. Still, I never raised my voice with her. Not once. I was raised on shouting, on slammed doors and broken plates and accusations thrown like stones. I swore she would never hear that from me. I thought if I loved gently enough, it would soften the world for her. When she left for college, I sat on her bed every night for a month. Just sat there. I didn't cry much. Just listened to the quiet, to the way the house had shifted without her. It was as though she took some of the gravity with her. The walls stopped humming. Even the dog paced more than usual, as if looking for someone who used to throw him the ball. She didn't call often, said classes were hard, that she was adjusting. I understood. Sent care packages, cookies, small notes, a sweater I found in her favorite color. No replies, most of the time. But once she called late, said she'd lost her scarf and it was cold. I mailed another one the next morning, the green one with the looped yarn that looked like leaves. She never said if. She got it. The wedding came quickly. Too quickly, I thought, but I kept my doubts quiet. She said she was happy. That was enough. I wore a lavender dress and sat in the second row. Her husband's parents had the front, and I told myself it was because they helped more with the venue. I held her bouquet during the photos. She didn't ask me to give a toast. But I smiled when they kissed. I clapped with everyone else. I moved in with them for a while after the first baby, just to help. She asked me to, said she was overwhelmed. I cooked. I did night feeds when they wanted to sleep. I folded tiny onesies and bought diapers when the stash ran out. I never asked for anything, not money, not thanks, just to be close to her, to be useful, needed. That's the part that stays with you, the memory of being needed. Once. And how quickly that can be rewritten, because I was needed until I WASN single quotes, until the baby started sleeping through the night, until her friends came back around, till the house felt full without me in it, started noticing how plans were made without including me, how holidays got quieter on my end, how my bedroom door creaked from lack of use, and then one day I overheard her saying that I'd stayed long enough. She said it kindly, gently, but it still carved something out of me, because I realized then I wasn't being loved. I was being tolerated, and even that only when it served a purpose. But back then, I stayed. I stayed even after the signs had turned from whispers to shouts. I stayed because I believed somehow that the love I gave would eventually be remembered. That kindness could work backwards. That one day she'd sit beside me, touch my hand, and say, "I remember." But that moment never came. And as the years moved forward, I learned the difference between being remembered and being forgotten politely. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the cruel trick of it. Being erased isn't a sudden cut, not some grand betrayal with violins and thunder. No, it's a slow fade. A quiet brushing away of your presence until the room can hold everyone but you, and no one notices you're standing outside the frame. It began with small things. She stopped asking for my recipes. That may sound trivial, but cooking was how I stayed close. I made her mashed lentils with cumin when she was teething, rice pudding with cardamom when she got her first heartbreak. Even after she married, she'd call now and then to ask how long to soak the chickpeas or what to do if the curry was too thin. And I'd walk her through it step by step, smiling even if I was standing on aching feet, holding the phone with my shoulder while stirring my own pot. Then one day she texted, instead of calling, just a photo of a recipe from a blog. Said she was trying something new, less oily, more modern, and that was that. I asked how it turned out. She said it was fine. The kids liked it. I knew she was being kind. But I also knew she never made my biryani again. Then there were the pictures. They used to hang on the hallway wall, family photos in mismatched frames. Some from vacations, others from birthdays. There was one of me and her in matching sweaters I'd knit the year she turned 10. She had the widest grin. That photo was always her favorite, or so she said once. One afternoon, I was dusting the console table when I noticed it was gone, replaced with a canvas print of her wedding day. A professional shot, warm-toned, tasteful. Everyone in place. I looked around. Few others had vanished too. It was subtle. Nothing to raise alarm. It's just a rotation, she said later when I asked. trying to freshen things up. But somehow none of the new photos had me in them. I started to hesitate before going downstairs in the mornings. I didn't want to interrupt their routine. Breakfast became a private thing for them. Almond milk, smoothies, multigrain cereal, everyone on separate screens. I'd make my tea quietly and take it outside to the porch, even when it was cold. I'd wrap a shawl around my shoulders and sit beside the potted fern I brought from my old place. The only thing I'd carried with me, really. Sometimes the youngest would follow me. He was 5 then, with soft eyes and sticky fingers. He'd ask about the birds, or why the sky changed colors in the evening. I'd tell him stories, nothing grand, just the kind that wove magic into ordinary things. But even that stopped eventually. One day he said his mom told him not to bother me, that I was tired a lot and needed space. I wanted to ask her why, but I didn't. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable in her own home. That's what I kept telling myself. Her home. Even though my name was still on the deed. Even though I'd paid off half the mortgage. When her husband was out of work, I didn't mention it. What would have been the point? One Sunday, they had friends over for brunch. I hadn't known. I was wearing my house clothes, a worn cotton kurta with a faint turmeric stain, no lipstick. I came down to grab a banana and found their dining room full of shiny people in linen and pastels. She saw me and smiled a tight smile, said, "Oh, you're up," as if I were a guest who'd overstayed. I offered to help. She said, No, just rest." She touched my arm gently, like I was a vase she didn't want to tip over. I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed for nearly an hour, banana still in hand, uneaten. That week, she suggested I take a little trip, said I'd been working too hard, helping too much. Maybe go see that cousin in Faisalabad. It's clear? My head? She said it like a gift, like she was doing me a kindness. I nodded. I smiled. And inside, something wilted. It was around then that my friend Selma stopped calling. We used to speak every other night, just brief things, nothing heavy. She'd ask if I was knitting again, or if the tulips came in that year. But she stopped. Suddenly, one night turned into 3, then 10. When I finally reached her, she said she thought I was busy with family. That my daughter had said I was resting more now, not taking calls. I felt my spine straighten. I didn't remember saying that. I didn't remember anyone asking. And so it began. The pullback. The retreat. When you're slowly written out of the narrative, you start questioning the details. Did I mishear that tone? Did I imagine that hesitation? You gaslight yourself because you want to believe the best. You want to protect the love that built the life even when the life has stopped, including you. I stopped joining them for movie night. They never noticed. I offered to pick up groceries. They said it was handled. I made tea for everyone once, just a small act, the way I used to, and found it untouched on the counter hours later. No one said anything. No one even poured it out. It just sat there, cooling, forgotten. That night, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror for a long time. The harsh light overhead, the lines beside my eyes deeper than I remembered. I reached for the jar of cream she'd gifted me last Eid. Firming, hydrating, youth-restoring. I hadn't asked for it. She just handed it over with a gentle smile and said it might help. I rubbed it into my skin anyway. Not because I believed it would work, but because I needed to feel something soften. Even if it was just my own hands. The erasure wasn't loud, but it was steady. And I was beginning to see how quiet cruelty could be. How it could wrap itself in politeness. And how a person could vanish not in one moment, but over the course of many, each one pretending it meant nothing at all. The first time I realized I was alone, I was standing in the middle of the garden holding a pair of shears. The roses had overgrown the fence line. They used to be her favorite roses, especially white ones, especially blooming in early spring. I had planted them when they moved in. Dug my hands into the cold, dark soil the same week they handed me a set of keys and said I could stay as long as I liked, but no one noticed them anymore. Not the thorns I trimmed. Not the petals I swept from the path. They bloomed and wilted without a word. I stood there, under that pale morning sun, gripping the shears. And it struck me that I couldn't remember the last time someone called me just to hear how I was. Not out of obligation. Not because something needed doing. Just to ask how I was sleeping. What I had for lunch. Whether the tulips came in or not, I used to get messages. Little things. A forwarded photo, a link to a news article, voice note. But now, when my phone buzzed, it was pharmacy reminders or spam. Once I stared at the screen so long, willing it to light up, I drained the battery without even using. Selma, my closest friend, stopped calling completely. I left 2 voicemails. Then I deleted them both, unheard. I didn't want her to think I was needy. Thought maybe I'd become too much, too quiet, too far removed from the old jokes and the bustle of days we once shared, before time and families and health took their toll. Before I became the woman with tea in hand, standing silently in doorways. Even my older cousin in Lahore, who used to call every Sunday like clockwork, shifted to polite Eid greetings. Text only, never voice, never face. At first I thought maybe I'd done something, said something, forgotten something important. I asked my daughter gently if anyone had mentioned myth she'd heard anything. She looked up from her laptop, blinked once, then said no, not that she could remember. Then she added that people grow apart. It's natural, she said. That I was in a different stage of life now. She said I should try to find things that fit better with my routine. I asked her what she meant, and she said gently, the way people do when they want you to agree and disappear. That maybe it was time to start thinking about new hobbies. That knitting was good and walking clubs were helpful for people my age. I smiled, said I'd think about it. But I didn't want a walking club. Wanted someone to ask if I'd eaten, someone to say they missed me. There was a shift in the air. I noticed it in how she'd pause before answering my questions, like she was choosing the mildest version of the truth. How she'd screen her calls, even in front of me. I once saw her glance at her phone, roll her eyes. "'Kay," and silence it tonally to smile and wave when I asked who it was. "Oh, just a robocall," she said. Always bothering us. I knew that wasn't true. I knew her expression when it was someone she didn't want to deal with. It used to be mine. She began closing the door to the study when she was on calls. The kids weren't allowed to disturb her, and slowly that rule extended to me. She never said it outright. But I heard it in how she explained her schedule, how she needed uninterrupted time. How things were crazy right now, how I could leave a note if something came up. So I started writing notes, little scraps of paper folded in half, left by the kettle or tucked beside her charger. Just reminders milk was low. The electrician called. The youngest has that cough again. She didn't always reply. Sometimes the notes stayed where I left them until I swept them into the trash myself. I told myself I was imagining it. I was being sensitive. That maybe she really was just overwhelmed. But the distance kept growing, inch by inch, till it no longer needed an explanation. The kids were changing too. Not out of malice, just absorbing the atmosphere. They stopped climbing into bed with me during thunderstorms. They stopped asking me to read their bedtime stories. Once, the youngest came into the kitchen and asked if I was still living there. I laughed, unsure how to answer. He said he wasn't sure because Mommy said I might go on a long trip soon. I didn't know about any trip that evening. I asked her gently if she'd said something. She looked startled, then shook her head and said the kids made things up all the time. That I shouldn't read too much into it, but I did. Of course I did, because by then I had learned to listen to the quiet. I had started noticing the changes in the house. My things moved around, as if being tidied out of sight. A drawer where I kept my sewing needles suddenly had photo albums. Stacked inside, my slippers disappeared from the hallway. The kitchen schedule she made for the helper no longer included my preferences. One morning, I opened the fridge and realized there was nothing in there I'd bought. Nothing I liked. Just oat milk, gluten-free bread, quinoa, spinach in plastic tubs. Not a single yogurt, not even plain rice. I closed the door and stood there, palm pressed against the handle, breathing in that sterile cold. That's when I understood, not in words, but in feeling, I was becoming a guest in the house I helped build. A relic. They weren't waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for me to notice. I already had. I used to check the mail each morning, out of habit more than necessity. I liked the routine of it, the soft creak of the front gate, the sun low and yellow across the lawn, the quiet moment when the day hadn't quite made up its mind yet. Most days it was just catalogs and offers, things addressed to resident. But one morning there was a letter for me. Real ink on the envelope, not printed, not typed. A name I didn't recognize. The return address was a law office in the city. I stood by the mailbox a long time before I opened it. Inside was a short formal note clipped to a larger packet. The note said they were confirming receipt of updated documents pertaining to a property transfer. My name listed as the original trustee. Her name listed now as the sole controlling party. Effective immediately, it said. A gentle thank you for your cooperation. I felt my hand tremble, just slightly. Not out of fear. Out of recognition, I had not signed anything recently. Back inside, I set the packet on the table and boiled water for tea. I stirred in sugar with slow, steady turns and watched the steam rise in the silence. Then I opened the papers again. Line after line of language, I understood enough to know the shape of it, the property. This home had been legally shifted out of my control. The supporting documentation showed the signature. Mine only. It wasn't it, looked like mine almost. But the tail of the Q in my surname was wrong. Too sharp. I always looped it. I taught my daughter to write cursive when she was 12. She knew my signature well. Taught her how to hold a pen properly, how to press lightly enough not to tear the page. She had learned everything I taught her. I didn't confront her right away. I wanted to believe there was a mistake, a clerical error, a mix-up. So I waited. I waited to see if she would say anything. That night at dinner, she passed me the serving spoon like always, made polite conversation, mentioned that she and her husband were planning to refinance, just casually, almost offhand, that it might be easier with fewer names on the paperwork. I asked what she meant. My voice didn't rise. I just asked softly what she meant by fewer names. She blinked, then smiled. Said something about how things were always so complicated when multiple people were listed, that it made insurance and banking a mess, that they were trying to simplify. I stared at her for a long time, stirred her tea, eyes glassy but smiling, and changed the subject. I spent that night wide awake. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the fan circling lazily overhead. I felt like I was drifting above myself, watching someone I no longer recognized. The next morning, I called the number on the letter. The woman on the other end of the line was polite. She confirmed the documents had been filed 3 weeks earlier. She read back the date of the signature. It was the day I had gone to the doctor with a dizzy spell. The day I'd been told to rest. The day my daughter had driven me home and tucked me into bed with soup and a cold compress, brushing my forehead with her hand and saying, I shouldn't worry about anything for the next few days. That was the day she'd filed the papers. She hadn't asked me. She hadn't explained. She had waited for a moment of weakness and taken it neatly, without confrontation, without mess. It was a surgical kind of betrayal. Precise, clean, and it shattered something in me. Later that week, I overheard her on the phone. I hadn't meant to. I was coming down the stairs, moving slowly because my joints were swollen again. She didn't hear me. She was standing in the kitchen, laughing quietly, saying that things were almost in place, that it would be easier to move forward when me, was settled somewhere smaller, that it would be better for everyone, less risk, less confusion. She said I was starting to forget things, that she was worried about me managing my own affairs, that it would be safer this way. I stepped back up the stairs before she saw me. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, palms open in my lap. I looked around at the things that were still mine. A carved wooden box that held my bangles. A framed picture of her as a baby. My late husband's reading lamp. And I realized how many of my things were already gone. Disappeared slowly over. The last few years, a quilt my grandmother stitched. A hand mirror with a crack in the silver frame. Cookbooks I brought from my old home. I hadn't noticed when they vanished. I'd thought I'd misplaced them, but they hadn't been misplaced. They'd been erased. I wasn't imagining the quiet. I wasn't being sensitive. I wasn't tired. I wasn't confused. I was being removed, intentionally, thoughtfully, as if I were a mistake in the blueprint that needed correcting. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. Not cruelly, not with fire or rage, but with clarity. A sharp, crystalline understanding of what was happening. Of what had already happened. She was not going to tell me the truth. She had written me out of my own life and expected I wouldn't. Notice, or worse, that I would notice and remain grateful anyway. But I wasn't grateful. I was awake now. Wide awake, and I wasn't going to be erased quietly. The next morning, I took out the box from the back of my closet. It was heavy with years, papers, ledgers, files folded so many times they had creases like skin. I had kept everything, not because I thought I'd need it, but because it made me feel safe. Bank statements, insurance records, utility bills. In my name, my husband used to joke that I was a filing cabinet with a heartbeat. But I'd seen too many people, especially women, lose everything just because they trusted too easily. Now I understood why my fingers had clung to every receipt. I laid everything out on the bed. Chronological piles. Highlighters. Paper. Clips. A small notepad. My eyes weren't as strong as they once were, but I took my time. I matched dates. Compared numbers. Noted changes. I found the first discrepancy on a quarterly property tax statement from a year ago. A new address listed for mailed correspondence, not mine, not the house address. Her husband's work office. I circled it, then came the electricity bill. Not in my name anymore. Not even split. All rerouted quietly. Piece by piece, my footprint in the household was being erased. I still lived there, still folded their laundry, still paid for the children's winter jackets last season because she said things were tight. But legally? Paper-wise, I was vanishing. I moved on to the insurance documents. It's pages and pages of language I'd read before, but never with this lens. There it was. A clause buried deep transfer of interest approved by secondary signer. The secondary signer had my name, but the handwriting beside it wasn't mine. The loop of the L was too wide. She had forged my name, again, at least twice. I didn't even feel angry, just steady. It was like watching water boil, inevitable if you let it sit long enough. The truth was rising, and I was finally watching it bubble. I called the bank next. It's a branch I'd used for over 2 decades. I asked to speak to someone familiar. Someone who'd seen me walk through those doors in my brown purse and shawl. Mr. Kirsch had answered. He still remembered me. He said he'd thought I moved, that I had requested paperless statements. Told him I had not. There was a pause. He said carefully that someone with joint access had made those changes 6 months ago. They had authorization, he said. I asked who. He paused again. Said the system listed my daughter. My voice didn't shake when I thanked him. I don't know how. That night, I waited until they were asleep. I moved through the house like a stranger, opening drawers I had once cleaned, cabinets I had once filled. I found a folder in the small locked drawer of her husband's home office desk. The key was still on a hook above the pantry. They hadn't bothered hiding it. Inside, copies of everything I had already seen, but cleaner, newer. Their versions, and something more, a draft of a rental agreement with a third party, an agency. My house, my property, scheduled for listing. They weren't just taking my name off the records. They were preparing to move me out. She hadn't said a word. Not a conversation, not a request, Just planning my exit the way you'd plan springcleaning.com, methodical, inevitable. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the one I sometimes used when my knees ached and the stairs were too much. The room was quiet, the curtains shifting. Slightly with the breeze from the window I always left cracked. I looked at the folder in my lap. And I made a decision. The next day, I took the folder, the envelope from the lawyer's office, and 3 labeled files from my storage box to someone I trusted more than anyone. Nail, my cousin's daughter, a real estate and probate lawyer. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since her mother's funeral. But I remembered her clear voice and sharp mind, even back when she was just 20 and still in school. I made an appointment. She told me to come in the next morning. She looked over the documents for over an hour, reading slowly, sometimes pausing, sometimes muttering things under her breath. Then she looked up at me and said the simplest sentence I'd heard in months. "This isn't right." She showed me the forged signatures. She explained how they had filed changes without my full consent. She said it was subtle, calculated, but illegal, that I had every right to contest it. That my claim wasn't weak, it was strong, especially with the documents I had kept. "You were never incompetent," she said. "You were manipulated." I nodded. I already knew. She made copies. Asked if I wanted her to reach out formally. I said not yet, that I needed time, that I needed to be the one to speak first. Because it wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition, truth, dignity. That evening, I returned home with my documents safely locked in my bag. I watched my daughter in the kitchen, humming to herself, stirring soup. She looked up and smiled at me like she always did, familiar, polished, practiced, and I smiled back. For the last time, without the truth between us. She thought she had hidden the paper trail well, thought I wouldn't look, wouldn't notice, wouldn't question. But I had followed the threads. I had found the loose ends, and now I was holding them in both hands. It was a Friday when the final piece fell into place. A blue envelope arrived. No return address, just my name, written in rushed, slanted handwriting. I thought it might be a mistake, or a condolence card from some distant acquaintance who hadn't heard the news that I hadn't died. But inside was something colder than grief. A lease agreement, signed, stamped. They had already rented out the house, the living room, dusted every morning. The garden I kept alive through 3 droughts. The kitchen where I had taught my granddaughter to roll dough with her tiny palms. All of it photographed and priced and offered up to strangers like I didn't exist. The agreement had a start. Date, 1 month from now, 30 days. That was how long I had left before the new tenants would move in. I looked down at the signature again. My daughter's bold, confident. The same name I used to write in careful loops on her school lunchbox. Now attached to a lease that would hand over my life like an unwanted heirloom. And tucked behind the lease another sheet. A moving company quote, scheduled to pack and relocate all remaining belongings of occupant. No name, just occupant. Words struck me harder than anything. Occupant, not mother, not owner, not even person, just something that needed removing. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the sunlight falling in crooked patterns across the quilt I'd stitched years ago. My hands were still, my breath shallow, but my mind sharpened into something I hadn't felt in years, something like steel. She hadn't told me because she knew I would never agree. She was planning to let me find out after the fact. A knock at the door, a moving truck pulling into the driveway, a smile and a shrug, and the words, "It's all taken care of." It was never meant to be a conversation. It was meant to be a dismissal. I had been dismissed before. By doctors, by banks, by neighbors who assumed my silence was ignorance, but never by her. Not like this. Not with paperwork that told me in language too polite to scream that I was nothing now. I had raised her not to be cruel, but cruelty doesn't always come with shouting dots. Sometimes it's written in blue ink on clean paper. Sometimes it's wrapped in concern. "We're just doing what's best for you. It's simpler this way. You'll be more comfortable somewhere smaller. They always frame it like a kindness. I remembered a conversation from 6 months ago, sitting across the table from her while she poured tea. She had looked tired. She said things were getting harder. Finances were tight, the kids needed more space. She laughed lightly and said maybe one day she'd sell the house and move into something easier. Something with fewer stairs. Then she looked at me and said, "Of course we'd find you a place. Too, something cozy. Something that makes sense." And I had nodded because what else could I do? I thought it was just talk. I didn't know she meant it as a plan already in motion. I didn't know the wheels had already been turning beneath my feet. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the notebook where I kept everything now. Notes from the lawyer. Pages flagged with yellow tabs. Contact numbers. Deadlines. I flipped to the calendar and counted the days. 20-9.20-9 days until strangers would be sleeping under the roof I once painted by hand. 2 coats, while she sat on the front lawn with popsicles and a plastic cup of lemonade. 20-9 days until I'd be boxed, labeled, removed. Unless I stopped it. Unless I claimed what was still mine. I called Nayla, told her everything. She didn't hesitate. She said we had what we needed. We'd file a cease and desist, freeze any further transactions, and initiate a legal reversal of the transfer. That we'd use the forgery, the lack of notice, the absence of capacity review, all of it. But more than that, she said, "You're going to tell your story." I asked her what she meant. She said people like my daughter count on silence. They count on shame. On the idea that no one will believe the old woman, that we'll be too afraid to make noise. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, yes, but more than that. I was awake. Clear that night, I stood in the living room while everyone slept. I turned on one lamp, the one in the corner, beside the old bookshelf. I looked around at everything I'd built, everything I'd preserved. The curtain hem I repaired last winter. The small nick in the coffee table from when she was 8 and spilled nail polish. It's the shelf where her wedding photo used to be before she replaced it with abstract art. I didn't cry. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there and promised myself one thing. This story would not end with me quietly leaving. This story would not end with me being evicted from my own life. It would end with the truth spoken aloud. In rooms where no one expected to hear it, and when it did, I would not be holding a suitcase. I would be holding the deed. The day after the envelope arrived, I woke before sunrise. I didn't plan to. My eyes just opened on their own, as if my body had grown tired of sleeping through its own erasure. I sat on the edge of the bed in the gray light, hands resting on my knees. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel small. Didn't feel like the background to someone else's story. It felt like someone coming back into herself. It was quiet in the house, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm, when the sky holds its breath and the air feels thick with what's coming. I moved slowly through the room, brushing my hair, putting on my softest shawl, the deep maroon one with the frayed corner. I had worn it when I signed my first employment contract, and again at my husband's funeral, which was a part of me as real as my hands. I chose it that morning with purpose, not for warmth, for memory. Downstairs, I boiled water for tea. I didn't make any for anyone else, just for me. I didn't leave a note. I didn't ask if anyone wanted a cup. I sat by the window and drank it slowly, watching the steam rise against the glass. Each sip steadied me. Not like a weapon, but like a weight. Something grounding. Something mine. I thought about everything I'd given, the nights I stayed, up rocking her when she was sick. The years I worked 2 jobs so she could go to school with new shoes. The way I never once let her see me cry when she was hurting because I thought strength meant silence. I thought motherhood was sacrifice. I thought love, if it was pure, didn't ask for anything in return. But love, real love, doesn't erase. It doesn't hide things in folders or forge signatures or whisper about you behind closed doors. It includes, and when it stops including you, That isn't love anymore. Strategy. I didn't reach this place with a scream. I didn't break plates. I didn't yell accusations down the hall. That's not how I've ever moved through life. What I felt that morning wasn't rage. It was return. I was returning to myself, the version of me before all of this. Before I was softened down to the shape of someone else's comfort. Before my yes became expected and my no became something to work around. I remembered who I was. Not just a mother. Not just a helper. Not just someone to be cared for or moved aside. I was the woman who built this family, brick by brick. Who made space for laughter and healing and forgiveness even when none was offered back. Who kept records not because she was paranoid, but because she understood what the world could do to a woman who didn't prepare. That morning, I started writing. Not just lists or notes for the lawyer. I wrote down every moment I could remember that brought me to this place. Not to prove it to anyone else. To prove it to myself. Because when they take enough from you, even your own story starts to feel like fiction. I wrote about the day I handed over my share of the house, smiling because she said she needed the stability. I wrote about the months I lived in the upstairs room without a working heater, so the kids could be warm. I wrote about the time I made biryani for a birthday. Party and wasn't invited to sit at the table. I wrote about the silence that grew like ivy through the house, curling around doorknobs and meal times and conversations, till it choked out anything that resembled love. And when I was done writing, I didn't cry. I felt clean. There's a clarity that comes after grief, once the shock is burned off. Quiet, it doesn't clamor for revenge or demand apologies that will never come. It simply says, now we begin. And I was ready to begin. I called Nayla again, told her I was ready to file, ready to send the formal notice, ready to speak the truth. Not in whispers, not in folded corners of the day, but in full voice, in public, with my name attached. She said she'd have the paperwork ready within 24 hours. Then she asked if I was sure, really sure, because it would change everything. And I said yes, because everything had already changed. She just didn't know it yet. That evening, my daughter sat across from me at dinner, scrolling through her phone as I set the table. She thanked me for the doll, said it smelled just like when she was little. I nodded, and for a moment, I almost smiled, but I didn't, because that little girl, the one who used to hold my hand and ask me to stay until she fell asleep, she wasn't here anymore. And the woman who replaced her had made choices. I couldn't protect her from Dot as we ate. I watched her, not with bitterness, not even with sadness, just with understanding, she thought. I was still asleep. She thought the woman who folded clothes and stirred soup and smiled politely was too. Gentle to fight back. But gentleness is not the opposite of strength. It is the root of it. And mine had just begun to bloom again. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day no one would mark for anything important. Overcast, still, the sky, and unmade bed. She was in the kitchen, humming something tuneless while arranging the children's lunchboxes. Heard back to me. .com, routine, ordinary. I stood at the doorway holding the documents. Not the originals. I'd given those to Nayla for safekeeping. But the copies, the ones with the signatures, the dates. The line where occupant replaced my name. The ones that bore the quiet bruise of betrayal in their neat blue ink. I said her name. She turned, halfway distracted, holding a sandwich crust. She smiled, the practiced kind. The one people give when they're already thinking about the next thing. Then she saw the papers in my hand. I asked her to sit. Not sharply, just steady. Just still. She hesitated, but something in my voice made her listen. She wiped her hands on a towel and sat at the table. The same table where I once braided her hair before school, where she cried over algebra. Where? I stayed up stitching beads onto her wedding dupatta by lamplight. Now we were seated like strangers. Across from each other, across from the thing she thought I would never see. I placed the documents in front of her, one page at a time. Not with drama, not with flourish, just with care. Like you'd place a child's test results on the table, letting the words do their own damage. She picked up the first page, read it. Her lips tightened. She didn't look up. I asked softly, when she had planned to tell me. When she had decided I was no longer worth informing, not even with a conversation. She said I was misunderstanding. That it wasn't what I thought. That she had been trying to help. To make things easier, simpler. That she had consulted professionals. That they said it was standard. That it wasn't personal. I watched her speak and realized she had practiced this. She wasn't caught off guard. She was trying to manage me. I asked her when she decided that I wasn't capable of making my own decisions. When did she appoint herself the custodian of my life? She said I'd been forgetting things, that I'd seemed confused, that sometimes I repeated stories. That was why she forged my signature, for forgetfulness or perceived confusion. Justified that she said it wasn't forgery, it was delegation. Efficiency. I asked her what word she'd use for taking ownership of a house. You didn't pay for. She said I lived there rent-free. She said it once, quietly, almost like she hadn't meant to, but she did. I heard it. And once said, it could not be unsaid, rent-free. That single quotes as what I was to her. An aging woman occupying space. Not a mother, not the hands that shaped her. Childhood. Not the voice that sang her to sleep when her father died. Just a burden dressed in thank yous and warm soup. I felt something settle in my chest then. Not anger, not even sorrow. Just a closing. A soft, deliberate closing. Like the last page of a book you now understand was never written for you. I told her I had spoken to a lawyer, that I knew my rights, that the transfer would be contested, that fraud was a chargeable offense, that her plans for eviction would not go forward, that the rental agreement was void. She blinked, then she laughed. Small, incredulous. She said, "What lawyer?" Told her. Naila. Her face changed. A name she recognized. A woman she couldn't manipulate. A name with consequence. She stood up quickly, pushed the chair back, poured herself water with a hand that trembled just slightly. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she turned back to me and said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Harder. As if being erased had been an act of kindness. As if my resistance was the cruelty." I stood slowly. My knees ached, but I didn't show it. I looked at her for a long time. The daughter I once wrapped in wool blankets. The girl who once asked me to promise I'd never leave her. And I said very clearly, "I will not be leaving." She started to respond, but I raised my hand gently and continued. I said that my name was still on the deed, that the reversal had already been filed, that I had legal documentation of the forged signatures, the rental agreement, the insurance modifications, that I had every right to pursue charges, but wasn't. Not yet. I wanted her to look at me and see not a woman in decline, but a woman returning. She stared at the floor. I told her I didn't hate her, I didn't even pity her, but I saw her now, and seeing someone clearly is not the same as forgiving them. She asked me what I wanted. I said, space, autonomy, my own door, my own name, my own life back. I said I would be moving when I chose to, not when I was pushed. I said she had one chance to make this right, not for me, but for the children watching, because they were always watching. And one day, she'd be the woman at the table, and they'd decide whether she got a chair. I left her standing there, beside the window, the sunlight hitting her face at a slant. She didn't follow me. She didn't call out. She just stood, and for the first time in years, I walked up the stairs with my back straight and my heart clear. She thought confrontation would break me, but it had rebuilt me, because now I was no longer whispering my worth. In dark corners now, I was speaking it aloud in my own voice, and the sound of it was steady, true, and mine. The next morning I woke early again, but this time not from dread. Something inside me had shifted, like an old door unstuck after years of silence. My breath came easier. My thoughts no longer chased each other in panicked circles. I had done something I hadn't in years. I had defended myself, spoken without apology. And now there was work to do. The first call I made was to Nayla. She answered on the first ring. I told her everything, the confrontation, the documents. The look on my daughter's face when she realized I wasn't going to step aside, Nayla. Didn't waste time. She said we'd move forward with a formal legal notice, not just to revoke the transfer of property, but to block any future attempts without my knowledge. She explained how we'd file an affidavit outlining the history, the forged signatures, and the intent to deceive. She used the word protective, not vengeful, not aggressive. Protective of my rights, of my name, of the life I had built with my own hands. I gave her permission to act on my behalf by the end of the call. She had scheduled a notary and was drafting letters to the rental agency, the housing board, and the family's financial advisor. People I hadn't even thought of. People who were part of the quiet machinery behind what had been done to me. I hadn't realized how powerful it would feel to be believed. Not questioned, not pitied, just taken seriously. I hung up and sat by the window, watching a bird land. On the railing, a small sharp-eyed thing, feathers rustling in the morning breeze, watched me for a moment, tilting its head. Then it flew off. I followed it with my eyes until it disappeared behind the old pine. The next call I made was to Salma. My voice shook a little as I waded through the rings. I didn't know if she'd pick up. It had been months since we last spoke, after the distance had crept in and made everything between us feel uncertain. She answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was soft, unsure. I didn't start with explanations. I just said I missed her. She said she'd been waiting to hear that. I told her what had happened, slowly, piece by piece. I didn't dramatize it. I just laid it out plainly. The signatures, the lease, the silence. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. She was quiet for a moment. And then she said something that almost made me cry. She said, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how to reach you without making it worse. That's the thing. About isolation, it doesn't always come from abandonment. Sometimes it's from confusion. It's from not knowing how to step in without being pushed out. Selma offered to come by that afternoon. I said yes, and for the first time in what felt like years. I said it without guilt. I spent the rest of the morning gathering more bank records, photo IDs, the original title deed, copies of my will. I called the utility companies and re-established my access. I filed to have my name re-added as a primary contact on the insurance. Each task felt small, but each one stitched me back into my life. Around noon, I stepped out into the garden with pruning shears and clipped away the dead branches on the rose bushes. Their petals were falling fast now, late in the season. But underneath, I saw new growth, small, tender green pushing through the dark. Salma arrived just after 3, wearing her soft beige shawl and carrying a box of mangoes. She hugged me like someone making sure I was still real. We sat on the porch and I poured us tea. She didn't ask questions. She just offered me presence. And in that moment, that was all I needed. Later, as we sat watching the sky shift into dusk, she said she'd been through something similar years ago. When her brother tried to control their mother's accounts, she said no one believed her at first, that it was hard, but that it mattered to say something. To not disappear. I asked her if it ever stopped hurting. She said no, but it stopped owning you. I nodded. And we sat in that quiet together, the kind of quiet that heals, not hollows. That night, I received a message from the neighborhood association. Chairwoman, Mrs. Zadie. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. She said she'd heard through a mutual friend that I might be in a difficult situation. She asked if I needed a character witness or a reference. She said she remembered how I used to run the Eid food drive without missing a single year. That I was the kind of woman people should rally around. I stared at that message for a long time before replying, because I realized people hadn't abandoned me. They just didn't know I needed them. And now I wasn't afraid to say that I did the next morning. I went to the bank with Selma. We met with Mr. Kershed. I signed the forms to block unauthorized access to my accounts. He looked at me with something like admiration and said, "It's good to see you, madam. For real, I mean." And I smiled. Because I knew what he meant. I wasn't hidden anymore, not in someone else's shadow, not under someone else's plan. I was visible, present, defended. I had allies now, not an army, but enough. Enough to remind me that I wasn't crazy, that my memory was clear, that my decisions were valid, that my story mattered. I returned home that evening to a silent house. My daughter wasn't in the kitchen. Her car was gone. A note on the fridge said she had taken the kids to her in-laws for the weekend. No apology, no confrontation, just absence. And for the first time, her absence didn't wound me. It freed me because I had support now. A lawyer, a friend, a community. And most importantly, myself. Not the softened version. Not the quiet, agreeable version. Not the woman they could slowly move out of frame. The real me, and she was just getting started. They didn't expect me to walk into the meeting wearing my best shawl. The navy one with the gold thread along the border. The one I had kept for only the most important days. Weddings, court appearances. The time I signed the title deed to the house in the first place. It draped over my shoulders like memory, and I wore it like armor. The meeting was at the office of their new lawyer, not mine. Neutral ground, they'd insisted. Her husband said it was just a conversation. I agreed, but I brought Nayla. With me, anyway. She came in, pressed gray linen and calm eyes, carrying a black folder tucked under one arm and a leather-bound notepad under the other. She didn't speak much on the way in. Neither did I. There were 4 chairs in the room, one for me, one for Nayla, one for my daughter, one for the lawyer who didn't look old enough to shave. He stood when we entered. Polite, distant, he offered. Tea, I declined. My daughter walked in 2 minutes later, hair pulled back, no makeup, a plain blouse, no earrings. She looked like she wanted to vanish into the beige walls. She didn't meet my eyes. Nayla opened her folder first. She laid out everything, the forged signatures, the rental agreement filed without notification, the notarized statement I'd written detailing my experience in the house, the emails she'd found buried in the communication, logs between my daughter and the property agency, ones that spoke of relocating an elderly occupant. Before any consent had been given, the young lawyer cleared his throat. He asked for clarification. Nayla gave it. She explained how legal guardianship could only be declared through a formal process, one that had never taken place. How consent by proxy required proof of incapacity. How all decisions made in my name were invalid unless I was proven unable to make them, and I wasn't. I hadn't been forgetful. I'd been excluded. That distinction mattered. He tried to push back, suggested perhaps there had been a misunderstanding, a miscommunication between family members. Nayla didn't raise her voice. She simply pointed to the signature line. Handwriting analyst's report. The date-stamped emails. Clause in the lease that named me as occupant, not owner, not co-signer. Not even relation. She finished with a sentence so clean it left no air in the room. You do not get to disappear. A person on paper just because it's convenient. I felt my daughter shift beside me. Her lawyer leaned forward and said cautiously, "So what does your client want?" I didn't let Nayla speak first. I spoke clearly, without tremble. I want full reinstatement of my legal rights to the property. I want the listing canceled. I want a notarized letter of apology from the agency acknowledging their role in processing a fraudulent rental. I want my daughter to sign a declaration voiding all changes made to our shared ownership. And I want assurance in writing that no further attempts will be made to alter my housing or financial status without direct written and verified consent. The lawyer scribbled something, blinked twice. My daughter sat still. Her hands were folded so tightly in her lap they looked bloodless. Then I added one more thing, and I want you to look at me, all of you, and say you understand that I am not confused, that I am not lost, that I am not to be managed like a set of misplaced keys. I turned to her. I told her I had raised her to be strong, not ruthless, that I had given everything, my labor, my love, my years, not so she could turn me into a liability, but so she would know how to carry her own family with dignity. I told her this wasn't revenge, it was truth, and the truth would stand with or without her blessing. She didn't cry. I hadn't expected her to. But she did look away, eyes fixed on the grain of the table. After a long silence, her lawyer cleared his throat. "We can draw up revised documents by next week." Nayla nodded. "Tomorrow?" He paused, then agreed. The meeting ended without drama. No shouting. No slamming of doors. Just paperwork. Just truth laid bare. My daughter left without speaking. Her husband never showed. It didn't matter, because I had shown up. I had made myself visible in a room that hoped I wouldn't, outside. The air was cool. The sun was beginning to shift until late afternoon. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting it warm my back. Nayla handed me the folder. Her hand brushed mine, and she gave me the smallest nod, the kind that says, "You did it." And I had. This was never just about the house. It was about being believed, about being heard, by rewriting. The ending they had tried to draft for me, I hadn't needed to scream. I hadn't needed to break. I had only needed to stand. And I did. 3 weeks later, the revised deed arrived by courier. Cream-colored envelope. My name, handwritten in even script. Not occupant, not resident. My name. The one I've carried since birth, through marriage, through motherhood, through betrayal. I opened it with steady fingers and laid it flat on the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once folded her school uniforms, where I'd shelled peas for dinner while she read aloud from storybooks. And now that table belonged to me again, legally, permanently, no more shadow signatures. No more legal tricks wrapped in concern. No more smiling while the floor beneath me was quietly sold off in square feet. I didn't cry, I just breathed, long and deep. Like my lungs had been carrying someone else's weight and had finally let go. I made myself tea, chamomile, no sugar, and drank it by the porch window. The birds were louder that morning, or maybe I was just listening again, the same day. The rental listing disappeared. Nayla forwarded me the confirmation email. The agent had been formally notified, the lease had been canceled, the account associated with the property removed. All future transactions blocked unless verified by me. It was done a few days later. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet that had once held her storage boxes, her husband's tax files, and Christmas decorations I'd never been asked to hang. I cleared them out, not in anger, just with precision. I folded what was hers and placed it in sealed bins. I stacked them neatly beside the door and sent her a message. "You may collect your things whenever convenient. I'll be away this week." No reply came, but I knew she saw it that night. I sat with my will, not the one we'd drafted years ago, where everything had been listed so carefully, the ring from my mother, the piano I bought secondhand in 1983, the savings bonds I'd built over decades of skipped lunches and off-brand cereal. That version was gone now. Burned in the fireplace one quiet evening while the windows stayed closed. This new will bore no hesitation. I rewrote everything, every item, every instruction, and then I added a note at the end. Not legally binding, just mine. Love is not a right. It is a responsibility. And responsibility is proven through presence, not promises. I signed it, dated it, and sealed it in an envelope with a copy sent to Nayla. Then I booked a train. One way, not out of spite, not to vanish dramatically. Just because I had spent too long staying put out of politeness. I found a quiet coastal town a few hours away. Not touristy, just simple. One bakery, One grocery store. A walking trail that hugged the edge of a cliff where the wind forgot to stop blowing. I rented a small place with a front porch and peeling paint. The kind of place that doesn't need fixing. Just noticing the day I left, I packed only what belonged to me. It's not what I'd been holding for others, just the maroon shawl. My books. My papers. A photograph of my husband from our younger days. His eyes still full of mischief. His collar always half wrinkled, no matter how many times I pressed it. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't write a farewell letter. I just walked out of the house, my house, with the deed locked in a folder and my spine straighter than it had been in years. The train ride was quiet. I watched the countryside pass like a memory too big to hold. No tears, no regret, just air returning to my lungs. When I arrived, I walked into the cottage, turned the key in the door, and stood for a long time in the center of the room. It was bare. It was perfect. That evening, I made lentil soup. For one, I played old music on a small speaker and danced by myself in the kitchen, barefoot, with no one watching. Not because I felt young, not because I needed joy to erase what came before, but because I was allowed to take up space again. That was the real victory. Not the paperwork, not the court filings, not the reversal of the fraud, or the steady voices in a lawyer's office. The victory was eating dinner without waiting for someone else to speak first. It was brushing my hair in the morning and seeing someone I recognized. It was saying yes only when I meant it, and no without apology. A week later, I sat at the cliff edge just after sunrise. The water below stretched out like silence made visible. No phone buzzing, no errands. No one correcting how I stirred the tea or where I placed the plates. Just me. My hands in my lap. My name in my own mouth. I had walked through abandonment. Not the dramatic kind, but the slow, quiet kind. The kind where you start to vanish long before anyone tells you you're gone. But I came out the other side and I brought myself with me. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of a fierce kind of love for the girl I used to be. The woman I almost stopped seeing. And the older version of me who now watched the sea without flinching. I wasn't looking for justice, anymore. I had found something. Better. Peace. And the door was wide open. I don't think healing ever announces itself. There's no trumpet, no grand arrival. It comes quietly, like morning light through thin curtains, slow, soft, and real, only when you let yourself feel it. That's how it began for me, not in courtrooms or confrontations, but in the tiny, invisible moments of choosing myself. Again and again, after years of being trained to forget how, I started planting herbs on the windowsill. Basil, mint, a stubborn pot of coriander that refused to sprout for weeks before it finally pushed through. I watered them each morning with my tea in hand, humming old songs from memory. No one asked me why I was singing. No one rolled their eyes or told me I was being silly. It was just me. And that was enough. I walked more. Not fast, not far. Just to feel the earth again. My bones ached less here, near the sea. Or maybe they ached the same, and I simply stopped resenting them for it. I would sit on a weathered bench beneath a crooked tree and watch the seabirds glide in wide, lazy arcs. I liked their wings, not because they were beautiful, but because they looked like they'd forgotten how to fold. I stopped checking my phone for her messages, not because I didn't wish things were different, but because I accepted they weren't. She hadn't called. Not once. Not since the documents were signed, the will rewritten, the bags packed. I used to rehearse what I would say if she did. All the ways I could soften the truth, lace it with love, make her see me again. But now I find silence easier. Not heavy, not bitter, just clean. There is a peace in not needing someone to come back in order for you to move forward. Some nights I write, just for myself. Pages and pages of stories I'll never read aloud. Some true, some almost true. All mine. I write about the girl I was at 19, the dreams I left hanging in the back of my mind like coats I never had the occasion to wear. I write about my husband, how he used to whistle under his breath when reading, and how he always burned toast but swore it added flavor. And I write about her. My daughter, not with hatred, not even with blame, just as a woman who made choices. Choices that hurt me. Choices. I will survive. It took me too long to understand this. Love and self-respect can exist side by side. One does not have to die for the other to live. Still, love the child I carried even if I no longer let her carry my future. Sometimes, in town, I see mothers and daughters walking together. I watch them closely, not with envy, with curiosity. Some hold hands, some bicker, some walk 3 paces apart. I wonder what their stories are. I wonder which one of them is the more wounded and which is still pretending not to be. We all carry our own losses. Some just dress them better. One afternoon, a little girl came to my door. Her cheeks were flushed and she held a small basket of lemons. She said her grandmother had told her to share them with neighbors, and that I looked like I'd know what to do with lemons. I laughed. The real kind. The kind that feels like it's brushing the dust off your ribs. I thanked her. I made lemon tea that night and, for the first time in weeks, fell asleep without waking once. It's strange the things that save us. A letter, a deed. A small girl with citrus in her hands. I bought wind chimes from the weekend market. Simple ones, brass and wood. They hang by the porch now, catching the afternoon breeze. Every time they stir, I imagine they are whispering something back to me. Not promises, not warnings, just reminders that I am still here. Still home. There's a small mirror by the door. Old frame. Slight crack in one corner. Catch my reflection in it sometimes before I leave to walk. I study my face. The creases, the softness, the gray in my hair that I no longer bother to dye. I look like someone I can trust now. Someone who does not need to explain herself. I used to wonder if she would ever understand what she did. One day, older, lonelier, she might knock on my door and ask to sit with me again. I no longer wait for that. Forgiveness is not a door I am holding open. It is a path I have chosen to walk alone. And this quiet, salt-swept, lemon-scented life, this is mine. She didn't take it. They didn't break it. I rebuilt it with my name in my own handwriting, with my words in my own voice, with love that bends but no longer disappears. And if you are hearing this, wherever you are, I want you to know, it is never too late to return to yourself. You are not too old. You are not too forgotten. You are not too much. You are enough to begin again. You always were. It's been a year. 12 soft chapters of mornings and evenings, none too loud, none too bitter. It's just mine. I measure time differently now, not in calendars or clocks, but in cups of tea changing tides the way the garden shifts color from season to season. The rosemary came back strong this spring. The mint is unruly. The coriander finally learned to stay. There are still things I miss. I won't pretend otherwise. I miss the sound of my grandchildren's footsteps running down the hallway. I miss the way her voice sounded before it sharpened, before every sentence became a transaction. I miss the idea of what we used to be, not just mother and daughter, but something softer. A team, a circle, a place we both belong to. But I don't miss begging. I don't miss shrinking. I don't miss being told in silence or in smiles that my time had passed and my place was no longer mine. Here, is in this little cottage with cracked window panes and stubborn floorboards, I have found a kind of peace that doesn't ask for applause. It just exists. It holds me. I've made friends here. Not many, but enough. A widow named Layla who walks every morning and brings me stories about the neighborhood cats. A boy from the shop down the road who carries my groceries and refuses to take a tip. An older couple who sometimes invite me to dinner, always setting a place without asking if I'll come. They make space for me, without being asked to. Some days I write letters I don't send. To her, to my younger self, to the version of me who once stood in a hallway with a wrapped gift and no chair to sit in. I tell her she did nothing wrong. That love is not a guarantee of kindness. That silence is not proof of guilt. I tell her she was worthy even then, standing on the outside of the life she helped build. I've kept a journal this year. It's just for me. It's almost full now. Pages of truth and memory and rediscovery. I wrote about the night I left, the final conversation, the moment the train pulled away and I let it all go, the need to be understood, the wish to be chosen. The old ache of being too much and not enough all at once. And I wrote about the moment. Weeks later, when I realized I hadn't thought of her that day, not once. And how instead of shame, I felt light. It's not forgetting, it's healing. She hasn't reached out. Not since the papers were signed. Not since I walked out without slamming the door. Maybe one day she will. Maybe she won't. That is her story too, right? Mine no longer depends on the ending she chooses. The last entry in the journal is simple. Freedom is not leaving. Freedom is knowing you can. There is a tree outside my cottage, gnarled, low with a crooked trunk and branches that curve like tired arms. It shouldn't be beautiful. But every spring, it blooms. Not all at once, not symmetrically, but wildly, bravely. Right? It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask to be admired. I sit beneath it sometimes with a blanket and a book. The wind carries the scent of the sea, and for a few moments, everything is quiet. Not empty, full of the life I chose. The one I almost didn't know I was allowed to have. Somewhere, she is living her version, raising her children, keeping her house, telling a story I am no longer a character in, and that's all right. Some books you close, some doors you lock, but some stories, the ones you write for yourself, you carry forward, and they keep you steady even when no one else knows the weight of them. I am not angry anymore. That surprised me, but forgiveness, I've learned, is not about who deserves it. It's about who you choose to set down. So you can walk without dragging the past behind you. I've set her down. I've set the weight down. I've set myself free. And now there is nothing left to reclaim. Because it's all here, in my hands, in my voice. In the morning light across this little porch, I've become the woman I needed. I've become the woman they didn't see coming. And I have nothing left to prove to them, to her, to anyone. Just this life, just this piece, just this story, my story. And if you've stayed with me until now, thank you. From the deepest part of me, thank you. You reminded me I was never speaking into silence. You heard me? Now I'm curious about you. Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you stayed with me until now, thank you. I'll leave you with 2 other stories I think you'll love.